So, from the time you are born till the time you croak, you are in built space. You're either in buildings, you're moving between buildings, you're living in towns. Architecture is a fundamental part of your life. But how often have you thought about it? How often have your teachers talked about it? How often have you been aware of the fact that architecture shapes who you are and your relationships and what happens between people and how people behave? Architecture is everywhere. It's all around us all the time, but we never talk about it. The elephant in the room is the room, right? And we never have thought about that. So I want to talk about my experience as an architectural historian, and I want to emphasize the historian part. I'm probably the only person in this room who is a historian, and I want to talk about the work I've been doing in the last 4 years that has really helped me find my way through an impasse of talking about what I do in my particular field. So, what are the tools we have for talking about architecture? Well, we have maps, and since I'm an historian and I work especially on really old stuff, right, 13th, 12th, 14th century, the distant past, I'm going to use Naples, a city in Italy that has a very bad reputation. I'm going to use Naples as an example. So what are our tools? Well, one tool is a ground plan, right? The ground plan, you can see here a historic plan of Naples, and it gives us an image of the city in a certain moment, but is that a very good image? Not really, because what we're looking at is the oldest city in Europe, founded in the 6th century BCE by the Greeks, right? And we're looking at it in the 18th century in this plan after it's gone through many, many, many changes. So another way to look at built space is to look at a photograph. Vesuvius is always fun, of course, to look at because you wonder when it's going to blow up. But the fact is that a photograph, right, like the ground plan, they have one thing in common, and that is that they are frozen documents, right? They represent a moment in time. Now, archaeologists, and that's one of the things I do, architectural historians, often try to do this kind of document. So I'm taking one particular place in this very old city of Naples, and I'm showing you an archaeological plan, and it shows in color different parts. So what you see in red there is actually a Roman market that's about 30 meters down underground level. You can go underneath and see it. And then what you see in green is where it says Chiesa, which is Italian for church. It's an old church. And then what you see in black is what we have more or less today. Well, this is a useful, maybe, question mark, but very intractable document, right? You've got to have prior knowledge to understand what's going on here. You have to have a lot of information to be able to parse and understand and figure this thing out. So this kind of document is not very useful for talking about the building it represents, which is this very beautiful church here. This very beautiful church, however, represents a whole accretion of historical moments. I'm going to talk about them with my frozen documents of plans and photographs. Then I'm going to show you how I found my way to something else. So, at this church, we have actually on top of the Roman market, there's a mudslide, and in the 6th century, they build a church on top of that. And we know that because they did an archaeological excavation right above my head here that shows that building. And so, with my students, we began to engage in technology and modeling, both AutoCAD and then Maya and Google SketchUp, to begin to show how we can imagine things that aren't there anymore. And so this is one of my students' models of what this church looked like. Now, it looked like that for a while, but then they put chapels on the side, starting in the 13th century, and you can see those chapels projecting out the sides of the building. And then they extended the church dramatically to the east end. They sort of doubled it in length. And that would have looked a bit like this. So you have that old basilica extended with a Gothic building after it, okay? Well, all right, this is a kind of photo montage on the left where I borrowed somebody else's basilica and stuck it onto the Gothic apse here, so to make it give an impression, but that doesn't exist anymore. The building is really a palimpsest of a whole bunch of different phases. So how can I tell this story better? Well, what they did finally was to take out the part you see in the left here and void out the building and make one big open space. That is to say, they emptied out all those columns and they used the outer envelope to make the building that we see today. And that's right there. So I began to struggle with this, and I began to think, how important is it for my students to be able to look at these plans and look at these photographs and tell a good story? Maybe what we want to do is have them tell the stories themselves, have them figure out with me, side by side, with the archaeological plan, how we can use technology to make a narrative, how we can tell good stories about places. I'm going to show you one about San Lorenzo, but we've also done lots of others. For example, one is in the city of Venice, where we ask the question, how does the city come to be? If you think about any space you know, whether it's your parents' home or the Perkins Library, when you begin to think about it, you realize that space is really like an amoeba. Even if it's made out of brick and stone, it changes all the time, right? People are reshaping it because people's needs change. Social needs, economic needs, and so on. How can we make the dynamism of spatial change? How can we show process as part of our representation in a way that this photograph can't begin to do? So I'm going to show you now, and it lasts just about 5.5 minutes, a video done with one of my Duke students, and this is a work in progress that begins to show what we're aiming at in terms of dialoguing with a sense of how places come to be. So what you're seeing behind you now is a map of that Greek city of Naples, and we've zoomed down into it, and we're there coming down into the old Forum, and we're going to talk about the first phase of this church in the 6th century. So there's a plan that was discovered in the excavations, and here's that first model that we made. Okay, we want to show you a little bit about what that building looks like, not only from the outside, but also we want to fly into the inside, and we want to reinvent what isn't visible anymore. So we're showing you that this was a rather simple structure with a wooden truss ceiling, with a round apse. The columns are old Roman columns that are reused. We can fly around it, and we can look at the outside and see how that looks. Now that building is going to go through many, many centuries and changes. So I want to focus on the changes that happen in the middle of the 13th century, and that is it becomes a Franciscan convent. They put chapels on it. So you're going to see, first of all, a tower is going to come up out of the ground. They're building up a tower, and that's going to emerge, first of all. We're not really sure exactly when. Then they're going to begin to push chapels, break down the sidewalls and put chapels in, and they're going to build a cloister at around the same time, and then they're going to build more chapels. So they don't do it all in one fell swoop. They do this as process, right? Change over time. So we can fly on top of the building, and we can look down and we can see this building has become furry because of these additions, right, that have transformed the character of that structure. And let's just take a trip inside again and have an idea about when we fly through this little entrance porch that is still the old entrance porch. Let's fly into the building. And let's see that we still have those Roman columns there, and we still have the old apse. But when we swivel to the side, right, you can see that those chapels made the building much wider and made it considerably more important. Now, we could engage in the reasons for that, but we're not going to do that today. Then they double the church in length, and that's the aquamarine part you just saw on the plan. This is a moment for me which is quite miraculous. The old basilica, boom, extended, right? And that Gothic extension, which is 600 years later from the original church, is designed to be in accordance with the proportions of the old building, right? So we have to imagine that that Gothic part was designed as an extension of a pre-existing structure. So on the outside, here it comes. Beautiful. You can see they continued the roof line, and they continued the outside extension, the width of the building, but it's in a later style, which is the Gothic style. And you can see that, what it would have looked like right there. So my students are learning how to make these models, and they're learning to ask questions about the historical evidence, so that instead of trying to write about a building in a book using words or those frozen documents that I talked about, ground plans, they are actually making things. They are making models and learning how buildings existed over time. So then we have a moment of radical change. We had that old nave, that old basilica in there. They're going to wipe that out. They're going to eliminate it, and they're simply going to dismantle the walls. In this case, we just pushed the walls to the side. Those columns are going to reappear in between the chapels. They're going to double the thickness of the wall to support a much, much wider wooden truss ceiling that now fills up that entire interior envelope of the space, right? A really huge space. And then we're going to back out, and we're dealing with a building of completely different proportions inside an old envelope. But they didn't tear it all down. They kept that Gothic choir, which had been the extension to the old church. But right now, when you look at it in the model, you realize it looks tiny compared to this gargantuan structure that rose up inside the periphery of the walls. And only a model can show you effectively the really dramatic jump in scale from the Gothic part to this huge kind of barn-like building they build right here. Then, because it's become a much more important place, a much bigger place, we're going to extend the cloister out and make it longer, and so on and so forth. So we have a whole bunch of changes. So we're working on this project. We're going to get a composer to make some music for it. We're going to add a narrative to it so I don't have to stand up and talk every time we show it. We're going to put in some archaeological plans to justify our decisions about the space. But what I really want to focus on is that this is a whole new kind of learning. A kind of learning that isn't about memorizing the history of buildings in the 13th century, right? It's a kind of learning that is really focused on using new technologies to tell stories about the world we live in, about the spaces we inhabit, to try to understand the reasons why we as human beings have shaped the world in the way that we have. So technology for me has been an amazing way of finding my way to a whole new way of teaching and a whole new way of talking about what we do. Thank you. It's a long story in just a few minutes. Thank you very much.